ladies and gentlemen, we think that this debate was already set up clearly. We think that we're talking about relationships, such as abusive relationships where the wife is being abused by the husband. But when we talk about the general concept of divorce, ladies and gentlemen, if the husband does not want the divorce and still wants the marriage to go on, we think that that wife still has to be in that marriage. We think that that wife still has to consent to that partner. And we say this is the problem with divorce, because we're still making those partners actually being stuck into a cycle of an abusive relationship. But even if they want to talk about how their status quo already solves the problem, well, ladies and gentlemen, we know the status quo takes a too long process to actually solve these abusive relationships in the first place. Because we're talking about going to trial, going to courts, but we think that using these licenses are actually going to solve it. And I'm going to tell you this in my rebuttals. So moving on to the first rebuttal on how they say that they believe in this concept of love and how they want the couple to actually make the marriage work in the first place. We have two responses. We think that it's not actually about questioning the love, but it is actually about the effort that each couple puts in the marriage in the first place. And what we see by licenses, ladies and gentlemen, it is a deterrent, because now these couples are going to feel that if they do something wrong, then their partner can easily end the marriage by not renewing the licenses again. And this is when they're actually going to put effort into their marriage, ladies and gentlemen, because now they know that their marriage can easily end if they do something wrong. But let's look at the second response, because even if they want to talk about how this discussion is dearly needed, we still see that these licenses are going to be renewed every 5 years. We think that these 5 years are actually enough for those couples to actually think about the relationship in the first place. Moving on to the second rebuttal on how they talk about the police is actually there for those abusive relationships. We don't think so, ladies and gentlemen, because when we talk about the concept of domestic abuse, we talk about how these wives rarely report the incidents to actually those police in the first place. Because what they want is a marriage to end peacefully, ladies and gentlemen. They want the marriage to end peacefully because they have endured a cycle of that abuse. And let's look at divorce. We don't see how they can actually end that marriage peacefully at the end of the day. Because since they don't want to report it to the police, then that means that they have to wait for the husband to actually sign the consent form at the end of the day. So if we wait for the husband to sign the consent form, ladies and gentlemen, how are these abusive relationships actually solved under their paradigm in the first place? But let's look at how they totally nitpicked on this idea that these husbands are going to force their wives to actually sign those licenses in the first place. Well, we think that this concept, ladies and gentlemen, we think that already the government, since it is a decision that is actually important, we think that the government can easily give them a room to actually sign the papers. We think that it can be easily a day confinement. We don't think that this is a big issue, but we think it is a big issue with their side, because we think that what happens is that because the concept of divorce requires the consent of two people, and this is when we think that those husbands can actually easily force the wife to sign it with them as well. So moving on to the third rebuttal on how they say that they want these happy couples, and how they say that we're actually destroying marriages at the end of the day. We don't see what is the harm, ladies and gentlemen, because the only thing they said was that we're basically making sure that marriage does not work and love is never going to be there. Well, they never solved those abusive relationships in the first place. And even though we destroy those happy relationships, ladies and gentlemen, what we're doing is actually we're aiding those abusive relationships and making sure that those couples who are actually enduring that process are going to be happier and actually live and make sure that they're actually going to go on with their life and actually move on. And this is what we want in today's debate. So moving on to my argument on how marriage licenses actually promote female empowerment in patriarchal societies. But before I move on,
when you say you want effort in love to be done by the periodically renewed licenses, we think that effort in love cannot be forced. Because when you force someone to do something good to each other, it means that it cannot last. You have to force them by this forever. And it means that when someday the partner is boring, they're not going to enjoy it anymore.
Ladies and gentlemen, we think that every marriage is also dependent on pressure, right? When we talk about pressure, we think it's actually needed for those people to actually feel that if they do something wrong, this is what they're going to get. It means that this principle of actions have consequences are going to be embedded in their minds, which society does follow, ladies and gentlemen. Society does follow that in the legal system, and we think that marriages should actually follow that in the same way. So moving on to my substantive point, because when we talk about these patriarchal societies, ladies and men, for example, actually dominate the society and dominate the relationship, where the wife rarely gets the same power in the relationship. But when we talk about licenses, what we're doing is that we're actually giving them the right to choice. We're actually giving them that freedom and the right to choose what they want to do with their relationship in the first place. Because we think this is when individual consent is formed. And we think that this is important in those types of societies, ladies and gentlemen, when these females are actually oppressed and when they rarely get that freedom to choice. Because we also think that this is when female empowerment is going to happen. We think that this is going to be actually a grassroots initiative for those females to start getting that right to choice. Because we think that since they do get since they get to say how they want their marriage to actually end, for example, where they, even if the husband does not want the marriage to end, we think that this is when they're going to feel that they're going to feel that they now have the choice, that they now are empowered. And this is important because when these women are in those types of societies, ladies and gentlemen, they feel that they have no right. They feel that they have no choice to actually say or do anything with their marriage. And we think that this is when divorce is never going to work with these women, ladies and gentlemen. We think that these women is always going to think that the husband has the choice, that the husband is going to be the people who actually has the same power. But when we give this individual consent form and hand it to those females, we think that this is when we give them the freedom to choice. And this is going to be a stepping stone. Because when we start with something like marriage, ladies and gentlemen, which is important in society, but we think that this is going to actually set a precedent in society that we should actually start helping those females get the freedom to choice. And we think that this is important for the feminist movement. So let's look at the entire debate, ladies and gentlemen, because we do think that marriage needs pressure and marriage actually needs this initiative for couples to actually start looking at their actions. That couples are going to be reluctant to actually do anything bad, because that is how marriages work, ladies and gentlemen. Marriages work when both people are happy. We think that marriages should be like that, and the only way to do that is to ensure that individual consent is there in order to make sure that both people are actually happy in their relationship and they want the marriage to go on. So for all these reasons, I'm proud to oppose. Thank you.